Wajay, I'm the Moose Cree MC Shibastik, proud member of the Moose Cree First Nation, and I've been asked to put together a video for you on making a fire. So come walk with me. Let's go. Now this is exactly what you don't want to see in the bush. This is a fire hazard. It is our responsibility as fire makers to burn this stuff safely and get rid of it before lightning hits it or something else lights it up. You know, and the bush just gets cluttered with all these dead trees. It's our responsibility to keep the bush clean by burning it and ridding the bush of this dead, rotting wood. There's always a way to find something dry to burn out in the bush. And this stuff right here, if we ever come across a tree like this, when I'm partridge hunting or out somewhere, it's like, oh, well, let's stop, let's make a fire. And we start breaking off the branches. And, you spend a whole day at a spot like this and you could easily burn this whole tree bit by bit until it's gone. But if you're just trying to make a quick fire like we often are, this is the perfect stuff for it. And not only is it so good to burn, so easy to burn, but like I said, it's important that we burn it. And this here's our birch bark. One of the most flammable materials out in the bush. Also one of the most water resistant. It's what we used for our boats and for our homes. But it's the best fire starter. And the way it just peels off the trees like this, you're not harming the tree at all by taking it off. You just take off the stuff that's already kind of peeling off like it's a little offering for you. Here, take some fire starter. It's the best stuff. You have this around, there's no excuse. You can get a fire going if you have birch bark. And what you notice too at the bottom, at the base of all these trees, is these dead branches. Another fire hazard. So when you go out there and make a fire, you snap these off, and this is the dry wood. This is the small pieces you need to get the fire going. There'll be a lot of little branches like this on the ground, lying around, but if they're on the ground, even if they're dead wood, they're not dry. They're going to be soaking up some of that moisture from the ground. Like these pieces here, totally dead, but if I were to try to chop these up and burn them, it wouldn't go so well. They're not as dry as they look. So before we make the fire here, what I'm going to do is scrape away some of the dry leaves and kind of create a kind of a damp spot to get the fire going. If I was going to be staying here longer and making a bigger fire, I would clear away a much bigger area. But this is just a quick bush fire when you're stopping for like a tea break and you just want to warm up or heat something up or just sit by the fire and enjoy that smell. It is so healing. So if you have rocks around, I'm by the lake right now, so there's lots of rocks. You can hear the water. And, so I was able to do this. Sometimes you can't find rocks, that's okay. But if you have rocks around, do this. And it's always important too, where we pick these spots to burn our fires. It's never random. Like I said, it's where there's a bunch of dead dry wood around that we see needs to be burned. Dead trees. And it's also near a water source, because when we're done our fire, we got to put the fire out. So if I'm ever going out partridge hunting back in the bush and I know we're going to be making a fire where there might not be water around, I always make sure we bring up a couple bottles of water, of course for drinking, but some extra water to put the fire out. And if you don't have water, you guys know what you got to do to put the fire out. Because that's one of the most important things about making a fire, is making sure that it is out. So to get the fire going, what I'm doing here is I have the birch bark on the bottom, and I'm just making a pile of this dead dry wood. And these dry cedar, if you ever see anything red, any of the spruce, the needle kind of trees, spruce or cedar or fir, anything when the needles are red, that means they're dry, and that stuff burns hot and fast. So I'm going to add a little bit of that to there. So now I got the best elements of starting a fire here. I got the birch bark and the red needles, and some dry dead branches. Some of the small branches that I took off the trees there. And not only is it important to break off those small branches and get rid of all that dry wood because like I said, it's a forest fire hazard, but it opens up the forest for the animals to walk around and for us to move around. We get rid of all these dead branches. So now I'm getting some bigger pieces. So these, see the way it just snaps off? If you just, if you're able to reach up and grab it at the bottom and pull it a certain way, it's so satisfying when it snaps right at the top like that. Oh, sometimes it breaks off halfway and you only get half the stick, but so these are nice dry branches. You're not hurting the tree at all. These branches are already dead. I swear it's like an offering from the tree to have some firewood. So now those branches just snap nice and easy. And with some branches this size, that's enough. They're big enough to get a nice fire going. And then as the fire gets bigger, we're going to add bigger pieces that we find. And once the fire gets really going hot too, you can add some pieces that are a little bit damp, that aren't so dry, because they'll get going with the heat of the fire and they'll actually burn longer too. So it's kind of good to put some damp wood on top there, because it burns a little bit slower. But of course you don't want it too wet. It's going to make too much smoke and it's just not going to burn. But these are all dry pieces. So here we go, one flick of the lighter. If I had one match, I would have just threw it in there. Get it right on that birch bark, and that's going to go. That's all you got to do. And you'll notice I left a little opening in the rocks right to the bottom left of the screen, because the wind was kind of coming from that direction. So I left a little opening in the rocks so the fire has some air to draw. And you light the fire on the side that the wind is blowing on. So the wind will kind of push the flames through the fire. And you see the way I piled the branches too. It looks kind of random. I'm just being quick. Some people like to be nice and neat. But the important thing is that there's room for the air to move through those branches. They're not just piled too tight. They're kind of in a random way so that the air can flow up through them. The flames can go through them and they could burn good. So let's just take a moment here to enjoy this sound. This is my favorite part. It's always important to remember the responsibility of making a fire. Once you get that fire going, it's your responsibility to watch it, make sure no sparks are flying anywhere that could cause a fire. You're just constantly keeping an eye on it, and you're responsible for that fire, because that fire, as warm and beautiful as it is, it's also very dangerous. It's so important for us to control our own fires as well, our fires inside. You know, I talk about this in my lyrics. Fire is powerful. So I'll just keep adding branches on top. I'll grab some more birch bark and dry red needles and stuff here and there, and kind of push it underneath to kind of keep the fire hot underneath. And I walk around in the bush, I see how thick it is and how cluttered it's becoming in so many places, because people don't go out and do this anymore. This isn't a thing that is done, and it's a lot of times of the year we're not allowed to do this. They say don't make fires because there's a risk of a forest fire, and I'm like, that's kind of ironic, because the fact that people aren't doing this is causing forest fires. Because like I said, now there's all this cluttered dry wood in the forest that should be being burned that isn't, that is causing forest fires. And how insulting is it to a Cree man like myself, who grew up making fires in the bush, being taught how to do it safely, and I know I have that knowledge, being told I'm just not allowed to do it. That's kind of insulting. We are all fire makers. This is a part of who we are. We should all have these teachings and this knowledge of how to do this in a safe way. Every bit of dry wood we're burning here is helping keep this forest safe. And this is like a metaphor for our thoughts too. You know, like we have. I talk about this in my workshops. We have a lot of clutter in our minds. A lot of thoughts and trauma and stuff we've gone through that is dead now and it's over, but we haven't got rid of it. It's still there. We haven't burned it. We haven't turned it to smoke, and it's causing stress, it's causing anxiety, and it's so important to go through your thoughts and to burn that dead stuff. And how you do that is you talk to your friends about it. You address those things, and you talk about them, and you let them out that way. That's how you get it out. You talk about it until you're not thinking about it anymore. And the hard thing could be is find somebody to talk to, and sometimes you just can't. And that's when you got to understand, and you have to have that faith that when you talk out loud in your mind, Kichimanatu, the Great Spirit, is hearing that. Every word. But you have to speak it out loud inside your mind. And getting out there in the land and making a fire and sitting by that fire like this is a great way to do that, to connect to the Great Spirit and to find that peace and that space where you can be alone with your thoughts and have that conversation with the Great Spirit within yourself. And in that silence and that crackling of the fire, it's much easier to hear what is being said back to you. So now we got this fire going hot. We're just going to keep adding dry wood that I find on the ground. Some of this stuff's a little bit damp, but it's going to burn now because that fire's going hot. So like I said, it's a steady thing. You don't just make your fire and then ignore it and sit back. It's you're constantly tending to it. You're constantly making sure it's burning evenly. Talk about fire being dangerous. One time, me and my father made the mistake of getting the fire going in the camp, and then before we closed the damper, we got gashik and went out and started fishing. Thought we'd give it like a couple minutes to get going, and then my dad, we were going to go back in, I guess, and close the damper, but got distracted by the fish. And after the third fish I caught, after the third cast and 3 fish, we looked back and realized the camp was on fire. And me and my father actually burnt our camp to the ground way up the Chipash River. Luckily we had a tarp in the boat. We were able to sleep under the tarp that night. Made it home the next day. Luckily the guns were all under my cot, and I was able to get those out and they weren't damaged. But yes, I've experienced how devastatingly powerful fire can be. I have so much respect for it. If you saw how easily this fire was made with just that one little flick of the lighter, you can really understand how easily a forest fire can happen. If one of those dead trees, one of those dry red trees, or one little spark hits those and they go, that they're going to burn so fast and so hot that everything around it is going to catch. So they say a good fire maker should take if you're a good fire maker, it should take you a lot longer to put out the fire than make it. And we're gonna get to that soon, but right now I'm just gonna keep feeding it. You can see how the wind is picking up and how much it affects the flames. You really gotta watch that. The wind could change directions, and then you gotta really rethink. My favorite wood to burn, the wood we burned most growing up, was spruce. As we see, when we gather wood for our fires, when we have the chainsaw and the axe and everything like that, it's a whole different thing. Different teachings are involved. How to find dead trees. You'll find them that are trees that are still standing, that are totally dry, and those are just waiting for us to bring them down and use for firewood. And they're also a fire hazard in the forest, so it's important that we go bring those down. But once they fall down and they lie on that ground, like those trees behind me, they're soaked. They soak up the water and they're not good for burning anymore. So we got to find these trees, and there's an art to it. Some of them, sometimes they look dead, but you look up at the top and just a little bit of green shows that tree's still alive and it's still going to be white on the inside. But when there's no green at all and you hit it with your axe, the sound that it makes when it's dry, it's part of it. You can tell by the sound. And it's a lot more work to go out in the bush and to find those dead trees. It's a lot easier just to go find a bunch of living trees that are nice and straight, cut them down, chop them up and put them in a pile and let them dry for a year or two and then burn them. But you're killing living trees when you do that. You're not helping the forest at all when you're doing that. You're taking from the forest when you do that. When you go out there and you burn the dry wood, when you find the dead trees, you're helping the forest. So now I'm going to start putting out the fire, and so to do that I kind of break it all up, try to break up all the coals and the branches. And I'm not doing what you think I'm doing here. I'm not doing what we sometimes have to do when we don't have water. But this is just straight bottled water I'm pouring on the fire. And trust me, it never takes one bottle. It might look like the fire's out. You see all the flames are gone. But that fire is not out. That fire is still very much alive. So one more trip down to the lake. Luckily, like I said, I was close to water for this, so this makes it much easier. More water. Something very satisfying about this as well. Of course, in the wintertime it's different. You don't there's not much of a risk if you just made a fire in the middle of the snow somewhere. It's obviously not going to go anywhere. And sometimes in the winter, I actually if it's in a really safe spot, I like to leave the fire going a little bit. I kind of say a little prayer and leave the fire going for the ancestors, in case they want to sit and chill for a bit longer. But this time of year, with these dry leaves around, you got to make sure that fire is out. Not quite yet. This should do it. Like I said, as with our emotions, sometimes that fire, that anger might seem gone. It might seem over it, but it lingers. And if you let it linger, you let those coals stay hot, you never know when a wind might come along and just spark it back up again. And then before you know it, the rage is flaming again. So it's important to keep talking about our issues, and keep working on if it's anger that you struggle with, keep working on it. Keep talking about the things that make you angry. Keep finding time to yourself to speak and to go through your thoughts. But you have to make sure that fire is out. You cannot risk that fire coming back when you're not paying attention and burning your whole forest down. So now I've got the water in there and I'm really digging it up. I'm searching for those pockets I've talked about. Sometimes there's a little pocket of coal that's burnt down into the earth a bit, and that's dangerous. You got to make sure that's all out. So now that I've dug it all out, I'm going to do one more bottle. One more to really make sure, because I love our forest. I could imagine the guilt I'd feel if I made a fire, then found out that I caused a forest fire and burnt down the whole place. Alright. So thank you guys so much for coming for a walk with me out in the bush to make a fire. We helped Mother Nature. We cleaned it out. We got rid of some of the dead wood. We got rid of those fire hazards. And the bush is a safer place now, a cleaner place because of it. and so are my thoughts. Miigwech.